The first thing, Des, you must do is take your hat off, which I'm going to do. And I've got to say, I'm absolutely blown away by the number of you who turned up today from different departments of university, from a variety of schools, from our own department. My own family have even come along as well, so thank you very much. Thank you very much also, and welcome to everyone. And thanks especially to the Warwick International Higher Education Academy. Gwen, thank you as well, and thank you, David, who've arranged and sponsored this event. Thank you again. Actually, the notes I'm going to be using from this, those will be available at some point along with these slides as well, and you'll be able to see the lecture capture that goes with this as well. I feel really privileged to be able to share some of my ideas with you this evening. It's great to see so many people from universities and schools in the audience, because I think that you're going to find this talk very relevant. Here goes. So, around 8 years ago, I had the privilege to deliver an inaugural lecture at the University of Derby, where I became a professor. The title was A Teacher Education for the 21st Century, as you can see from this poster here. The talk provided a rationale and blueprint for how to develop teacher education in schools. Since 2011, I've used these ideas as a blueprint to drive my support for school-based teacher education. At the time, around 20% of the 50,000 teacher trainees each year were taught in school-based programs like School Direct or the Graduate Teacher Programme. Now it's nearer to 50%, so 25,000 students roughly every year come through the School Direct programme. I don't see that changing, but I do see significant changes on the horizon. A lot has changed since 2011. In 2014, I had the fantastic pleasure of joining the University of Warwick. Our primary school-based teacher training has tripled in size, I would say very much down to my colleagues in the audience here. We have school hubs in North London and Derby, and there's some of the brilliant colleagues from the Derby group are here today. And it's been an absolute pleasure to put some of the ideas into practice for the benefit of teachers and schools that I talked about back in 2011. Of course, most importantly, I must thank all of the colleagues in the university and in schools who have really made this happen. They are the important people. You are the important people. One thing I've realised as a teacher educator, it's not that what I achieve that's important or that counts, it's how I support other people to success. We should never forget that as line managers and the people that I work with in our department. I absolutely love working with other people. It's such a pleasure working with all of you. Whether it's writing books, carrying out research, or developing professional development in schools. And I'm going to tell you about some of those stories later on in this session. So here we are. This is the inaugural lecture part 1, was back in 2001. This is inaugural lecture part 2, 2019. You might say it's the sequel. I could call it A Teacher Education for the 22nd Century. The title of this lecture is The Common Good, University and School Transformation Through Teacher Education. The 2011 inaugural lecture examined the role of schools in teacher education. This lecture looks at the role of universities, their relationships with schools, and how we can work together to promote education more broadly in society. I'm going to choose my words really carefully when I talk about that. That's partly why this is scripted. The focus is on education. In examining this relationship, I want to come back to the purpose of universities and how the concept of the common good actually provides a rationale for universities and schools working more closely together in curriculum design, development and research. Universities and schools are both transformed by working more closely together. In particular, I'm going to focus on the important connecting role between university teacher education departments and school partnerships. For instance, in Warwick, in our department here, we have more than 400 trainee teachers in the Centre for Teacher Education, with something around about 1,000 placements in nearly 500 schools from the North Midlands, just south of actually Manchester in some cases, down to North London. By my estimate, that means that something between 20,000 and 30,000 children and young people are taught by Warwick teachers every year. And that doesn't include people who've already qualified who are teaching our students. That's a big responsibility for schools and university. We've got to get it right. A good education is a common good in society. It transforms communities. It transforms individuals. It transforms me. Ultimately, a good education is more than the development of knowledge, skills, and gaining qualifications. A good education changes you. It helps you know yourself better, to reflect on your own values and aspirations for society. Of course, teacher education has a very important role in connecting universities and schools, and I'm going to come back to that later in this talk. As a chancellor at one graduation ceremony said, a fantastic question I've always remembered, what have you done with what you've got? I've never forgotten that. For me, a good education must always focus on high ideals and aspirations. Put simply, my motto is always treat people decently. A good education is inclusive, just, and aims to work with our local community to make the world a better place. Social justice for me is a really important aspect of a good education. How we become a better place is important, and social justice is right at the heart of that process. So why is the common good? Why is teacher education really important? In the 2011 inaugural lecture, I referred to the Robbins Report, 1963. This looked at the role of universities, and in particular the location of teacher education in universities. Many universities set up schools of education in England, and I find it really interesting, incidentally, that the French universities are often called les grandes écoles, the great schools. This very close link in the language of schools and universities is fascinating for me. But in 1963, Robbins talked about the growth of universities across Europe in the medieval times, in the medieval age. Centuries ago, many universities, like schools, had their origins in the church. And you see there the sort of that knowledge is almost something quite sacred, and to me it still is in a certain sense. Robbins gave this analogy to illustrate what he thought was important about education. If the castle in a medieval city was literally a stronghold, so Robbins saw the power of education through universities and schools as being the modern equivalent. Now, a castle could be seen as an unfortunate metaphor. A castle is fixed with strong walls to repel invaders, whereas education is dynamic and uncertain, but it's hopefully open to everyone. I do, however, believe that a good education gives individuals and a wider community strong roots and a capability to make most of life. The strength of character, but also the strength from knowledge, which combines to provide answers to current and future challenges. I also want to paint a rich picture of what I consider to be a good education. In writing this lecture, I wanted to ask some of these important questions that you can see here. Just in case all this becomes too much for you, we're going to have a musical interlude with my guitar teacher, Chris Susans, who's going to play halfway through this. You'll be pleased to know I'm not going to sing or dance to this bit, including going on a bear hunt, by the way. So I want to come to the kind of purpose of universities. To be blunt, what is the point of universities? And more generally, what's the point of education and teacher education? Robbins, in a 1963 report, talked about the purpose of the university in terms of instruction, promotion, and the general powers of the mind to produce not just mere specialists, but cultivated men and women, as well as the search for truth, the transmission of a common culture and common standards of citizenship. And these aspirations, I think, they're still relevant in a good education. In summary, universities have been seen as being communities where a teaching purpose is central. I still believe that knowledge and teaching is central in universities. In CTE, for instance, we teach teachers. That's our central work. It's the development of expertise and a vocational identity of many people. So I see my colleague from the medical school, Vinod Patel, who also works in a hospital as a consultant, but also involved in developing clinical skills, or David Davis as well from the medical school. Fantastic to see you here. So that vocational development is really important. Again, in Centre for Teacher Education, we develop, teachers, and it's part of a really important supply for teachers in the Midlands. Universities are also creators and testers and sites for the evaluation and application of new knowledge. There's a research purpose. Universities departments often focus on teaching, research and knowledge exchange. In our centre, we have a schools research network, of which there are many colleagues here today. I see Emma from Holly Mounts Primary School, so thank you very much for coming along. We're involved in research with you. And also, in terms of their civic purpose, universities make an important contribution to society as well. There's a lot of good work happening, for instance, in Coventry around the Coventry City of Culture between the University of Coventry as well as the University of Warwick in that respect. And also, increasingly, universities are an important part of the economic engine of the community. So Phil Mulby from Schneider UK is here from the Science Park in University. CTE has an important contribution economically in terms of its international PGCE. So now we have a hub in Bangkok, so we can say that we're contributing to the exports of this country. There seems to me to be a common purpose in university and school education. Teaching, employment, civic and vocational at least. I'm going to argue that research and development dimension in teacher education is an important area that could be promoted much more for the future benefit of schools and universities. The history of education provides some fantastic examples of scientific pioneers like Joseph Priestley, who was around in the 1700s. He not only discovered oxygen, started his work in Birmingham, set up schools in Birmingham, but then went on to set up schools in the Manchester area, so he set up the Warrington Academy in 1756. The great historian of education, Brian Simon, explains how Priestley aimed to secure the active participation of students through active learning, often conducting experiments with air pumps and electrical machines. He encouraged interruptions, questions and discussions, encouraging his students to have their own point of view. I think that's still important. You could say that was almost an Ofsted outstanding lesson if you're looking at the work of Priestley from the 1700s. But seriously, here we have one of the great scientists working closely with children in school in the 18th century. I do believe that there is much that is common in the purpose of university and schools in education. If so, how can we work together towards a common purpose in education for the common good of schools and universities? So there's great partnerships that we're involved in our departments. You can see some of the sort of titles and data around that on the screen here. There's already many excellent examples of partnership and collaboration between the university and schools. In Warwick, for instance, in the Centre for Teacher Education, there are over 200 schools actively involved in partnership, delivering aspects of the PGCE programme, with placements from the early years through primary and secondary in our sister department, CLL, also working into FE as well. One fantastic example locally that I've worked pretty closely with, David mentioned my interest in special education, Sherburn Fields Special School, who teach our students about special needs and disability. They have an extremely high quality professional development programme underpinned by research. So Sarah Nelms is the assistant head teacher in the school, talks about the neurology of autism and how that impacts on your interpretation of how you teach children on the autistic spectrum. It's absolutely fantastic. And they demonstrate through experiences in the classroom as well how you can put these things into practice. I know there are colleagues here from President Kennedy, which is a brilliant school, really heavily investing in the potential of its staff. Research-based teaching is the goal of the school. As Nick Mort, who is one of the leading people within that school, says, don't just focus on what works, but what works and why in this school. The school recognises that just recycling ideas within a school group or network is just not good enough. Looking outwards, and for instance, working with a local university, as President Kennedy School does, is a great way of providing staff with the tools to carry out discipline inquiry with a rigorous approach to school-based research. But we should all be asking more why questions in education. Why are we doing this? Does it really help children and adults also to learn? Another group we work with in London, it's the Cuckoo Hall Academy Trust, has provided the opportunity to collaborate in a much deeper level as well, a deeper partnership than very often that you find in teacher education. Not only do we train a cohort of PTCE primary and secondary students there every year, actually last year, for instance, we had 13 teachers from the school who also did their masters, and they were looking at research projects focused on the school in areas of school improvement, school learning. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And university colleagues are supporting developments in that school, looking at curriculum research and development. I mentioned social justice. Essentially, within this university as well, I've been really impressed by the encouragement from the Director of Inclusion, she can't be here tonight, but Colby Sheargill, in terms of promoting inclusion both within the university and in schools in a very practical way. Likewise, recent changes to the widening participation policy have emphasised not only support for potential students of secondary age coming to the university, but also for primary age children, and colleagues from Hollymount Primary School have been subject to some of the work in that area. Universities really should develop collaboration across the age range for the benefit of all children. I remember as a fairly new teacher back in 1993, just after I qualified, being asked to come along to a meeting in the school I worked in, and there was a visiting Pro-Vice Chancellor from a local university. I couldn't believe they invited me to that meeting. I thought it was such an honour. And the question was, how can a school work with a university? And it was brilliant because it gave me so many ideas in terms of, looking at different ways to work with different departments and inviting people in, taking our children to the local university and so on. I was mesmerised by that opportunity. But coming back to social justice, I'm really not interested in being and talking about it for being politically correct. For me, it comes back to that practical dimension, always treat people decently. Sounds simple, but this dictum is at the heart of social justice. You might not agree with some of the terminology and the terms in education, like closing a gap, or school improvement, or school standards. But for me, these are all questions of social justice. These concepts all focus on making a difference to children and young people's lives, and I would also say the lives of teachers as well. So actually, social justice is a concept for teachers as well as children. These concepts are all focused on making a difference to children and young people's lives. It's an opportunity for universities and schools to work together to find out what we can do to improve lives through collaboration. According to Mesereau 2014, transformative education changes people's lives through a deep structural shift in the basic premises of thought, feelings, and actions. So transformation comes through thought, feelings, and actions. Don't forget that. Social justice is a slippery concept. Everyone aspires to it, but no one can define it. But I love Morwena Griffiths, who's from Nottingham Trent University. Back in 2003, she tried to give an attempt at defining social justice. And she talked about a framework in which social justice is a verb with a subject. Just reflecting on or knowing about equality, injustices and inclusion is not enough. We each individually need to take action to make a difference. Social justice requires both recognition, so you need to see it, but also do something about it, redistribution. Through coming together, listening to and valuing each other, we can discuss ways to make improvements. The good for individuals both depends on and affects the good for all. So there's a great German philosopher that I studied actually when I was at my first university, Reading, Immanuel Kant, recognises that everyone is due a degree of happiness, but that we all have a responsibility to cultivate this in others. So we are all due happiness, but we have a responsibility to cultivate happiness in other people. I'm looking at Colette here, who I know you're really into sort of well-being and happiness. That's a really important thing. It's not just about ourselves, it's about other people as well. So the common good is an equally slippery topic. Max Jade, in 2018, who's from Glasgow University, investigates this topic in the history and contemporary political thought. He looked at Aristotle. Aristotle, back in ancient Greek times, talked about the good of the city-state. He talked about the mutual and common good. But we only achieve that through noble actions. I love that phrase, noble actions. It's about how we live out these values that's really, really important. The danger with concepts such as the common good is that where one group in society dominates the definition of the common good, this can lead to conflicts with individual rights. Of course, society is deeply complex and there's inevitably a fuzzy relationship between society and the individual. It does not, however, justify acts of injustice. I won't shy away from the need to focus on social justice and the common good. It should underpin what we do. Gert Ballester, who used to be a professor at Brunel University, is now at King's College in London. In his book in 2010, his book was called A Good Education in the Age of Measurement. I love that title. Talks about the difference between teaching and learning on the one hand and education on the other. His view is that the language of teaching and learning is reductive. It's not enough to describe what's important in what we do. Whilst teaching and learning are important elements, education is more than the pedagogical process of teaching and learning. I believe that children, young people and teachers deserve a broad and balanced education. That means moving beyond the tests, exams and measurement of learners and teachers. Sports, culture and art still have a transformative impact on teachers and children. I saw this actually in a partnership between the Warwick Arts Centre that I evaluated, working with some North Leamington primary schools. The schools and children absolutely adored the experience with the Warwick Arts Centre. That focused on the theatre, visual arts and things like art and this type of thing across 2 years. When I interviewed the children, their teachers, they were so enthusiastic about the impact that project had had. That I think they probably remembered more of that project than some of the tests that they've been through. That won't surprise you. Music, this is a cue here, has had the same impact on my life. How I learn and what I value in education. All teachers need a challenge and to feel fulfilled. About 14 years ago, I finished my PhD and really wanted something new to challenge me. Music has always given me that inspiration. So probably from about the age of 12 or so, I was playing guitar without any lessons. Famously up in my bedroom, playing the guitar, I heard my dad downstairs saying, "Not that bloody guitar again." My wife still says the same thing. But it's given me a real inspiration. I'd be far too nervous to play tonight. But I've asked my guitar teacher, who's Chris Susans, who's sitting in the front here, to play some of the pieces that we've been working on over recent years. And I started going to Chris back in about 2010-ish or so. David Lamburn said that he's still taking me through my grade 8. I finished my grade 8, I think it's about 2011-ish or so, wasn't it? So Chris has taken me through all of that, and he's been a fantastic inspiration to me. In classical music, learning how to play studies is a really important way to challenge your musical understanding. Different keys, musical keys, different techniques, different musical styles. It's like being a trainee teacher, learning the language and skills of the classroom. You can see a picture here of Leo Brouwer. He's a brilliant Cuban composer, guitarist and teacher, still alive now, still performing in Cuba and all the way around the world, including this country. 60 years ago, Brouwer wrote a set of 20 simple studies when he was teaching guitar in New York City. They're a brilliant mix of styles, musical language, and techniques. Now, Chris isn't going to play all 20, but he's going to play just a few of them for you now as a little interlude. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris. That's absolutely brilliant. We'll also have an opportunity right at the end of all this as well, where Chris is going to play as a final tune at the end as well. Thank you for that, Chris. Perhaps one of the great examples of schools and universities working together is the Bank Street College of Education in New York City in the US. The Bank Street College of Education in New York City was founded in 1916, here's a picture of it here, by Lucy Sprague Mitchell, and it was initially called the Bureau of Educational Experiments. To modern ears, not a very appealing name, but behind this lay the idea of teaching children and young people in a building which also develops and prepares the teachers of tomorrow. Over 80 trainee teachers learn how to teach in this school every year. Most of the teachers are college graduates, and there's also a group of children who regularly teach graduates, graduate college workshops and lectures, giving a very vivid and authentic account of learning from a child's perspective. But this should not be confused with mere on-the-job training. College students and professors are regularly engaged in research with child development and pedagogy as a key focus. The College of Education promotes theory for practice and practice which informs theory. It's a good combination. What's more, the Bank Street College was a key force in a very influential Head Start programme, which was a programme looking at early years interventions in America. It was funded to the tune of something like $10 billion or so during the 1960s and 70s, and that was led by the principal of the Bank Street College of Education, whose name was Jerome Bruner, who was also the father of cognitive science. I had this approach in mind, actually, that particular model from the US, when I helped set up the hubs for PGCE in London and Derby, like the colleagues we're working with here from Harrington Nursery, and Sherborne Fields Special School, which I've already explained. Sherborne Fields is one of over 800 teaching schools in England with their origins in the professional development school movement in the US. Sherborne Fields is an amazing school, as all the schools are here that you represent. The evidence that comes from Godfrey and Brown 2018, so far from evaluations of the work of teaching schools, is that their capacity for research and development is best when they work with universities. Where this has been most successful, teaching school alliances and networks of schools with local universities have been particularly helpful in supporting projects. However, such partnerships are insufficiently developed systemically, and a fragmented school system is not helping these to develop as coherently as it could be, as Toby Greeney says, 2014. And he goes on to say there's little sign that university school links to support research and development are moving towards a more sustainable position. That's a worry, but it's an opportunity for us as well, I think. In this last quote, there's an opportunity to develop a greater school and university link. At the North London Trust, I talked about curriculum design and research and the link with our master's students. One of my university colleagues is here tonight. Brittany Wright has been supporting the school in the development of an English strategy from the age of 5 to 16. This is certainly not university telling a school what the curriculum should look like, but it's very much in the tradition of Lawrence Stenhouse, who was a great writer and a great researcher into the curriculum in the 1970s. Lawrence Stenhouse always saw the power of the teacher-researcher, particularly in relation to curriculum development. This is an example, like the example from North London, of schools and universities co-creating the school curriculum. A strategy for the curriculum which is underpinned and evaluated with research in the school is certainly more powerful than one which is bought in and delivered with no understanding or rationale. Much as with all learners, we need to give teachers the tools to learn. And this is no different with curriculum design and curriculum research. Curriculum design is a process by which the statutory curriculum is translated into the taught curriculum in schools. It's a complex process. Finland is long seen as a leader in school and university integrated approaches to curriculum. And I wanted to give you an example of a leading light in the Finnish approach called Pasi Sahlberg, who contrasts the Finnish education system with that in countries like the UK. Pasi Sahlberg says, by contrast, a typical feature of teaching and learning in Finland is high confidence in teachers and principals or head teachers as professionals. Another feature involves encouraging teachers and students to try new ideas and perspectives. In other words, making a school a creative and inspiring place to teach and learn, not only for children, but for teachers, and those both are really important to me. Co-creation in the curriculum in the way that Brittany has been working is working with head teachers in this North London MATS, Multi-Academy Trust, is typical of the curriculum design and research that takes place in Finland. As you can see from this diagram, overall in the Centre for Teacher Education we see many synergies between initial teacher education, professional development, school development, and school-based research in relation to the curriculum. In the Centre for Teacher Education, for instance, we've been developing a network of partnership schools who are interested in collaborating in school research. In this collaboration, we see opportunities to develop collaborative research for the benefit of both schools and the university. It works both ways. On the one hand, schools want to develop a research-informed curriculum. On the other, the university has skilled teacher educators who know how to develop research tools to empower teachers, especially at a time when curriculum is increasingly under the spotlight in universities and schools, actually with the Ofsted's handbook for school inspection, also actually recent developments in the research focus and spotlight, if you like, have all looked at the importance of public service and teacher supply as well and education. But we also need quality in school-based research. The British Education Research Association talks about close to practice research in schools. They also talk about the need for a strong theoretical background, a robust and rigorous research design, and a consideration for the sample size and the research cycle, the different phases of research. Likewise, due consideration to educational and research ethics must be central both in curriculum and more generally school-based research. Again, teacher education is well placed to support both those aspects. The Department for Education has a set of national standards for professional development in schools. What I would say is those are not always that well known in schools, but they're really important. But they are extremely important. Great teachers need the best professional development. So for curriculum development, they talk about professional development. They have a focus on improving and evaluating pupil outcomes, being underpinned by robust evidence and expertise, generally including collaboration and expert challenge, also being sustained over a period of time, but with prioritisation from school leaders within the school. That's third point, which I said, which is about expert challenge. I think universities will be able to work with schools in that area. So, for example, developing disciplinary and pedagogical excellence, providing the opportunity for school subject leaders and subject academics to collaborate is a great opportunity. At a time when schools have less resources to support the subject knowledge and understanding of teachers, making links with the university subject teacher education departments makes a lot of sense to me. Of course, the challenge should work both ways. Challenged by schools for teacher education. So, I've heard many brilliant examples across the country of schools coming into the university and contributing to teacher education programs, as well as university departments contributing to schools as well. My colleague Carol Wild, who's here from our master's programme, is currently developing accreditation for national professional qualifications, and I think that's a really good move as well. Initial teacher education is central to what we do in a teacher education department, so you'd expect close collaboration between schools and the university. I've already explained that model of collaboratively delivered teacher training between universities and schools. In the 2011 lecture, I made the case for the contribution of schools to teacher education programmes. In this lecture, I'm making a strong case for the potential opportunities for universities to support schools through research, curriculum development, and the co-development of school professional development with universities. As the diagram shows, initial teacher education, professional development research, and school development are mutually supportive. They should go hand in hand. A model for a school, or better still, a network of schools, a teaching school or multi-academy trust, should try to include these connecting elements of the educational jigsaw. Of course, none of this is necessarily easy. But as Lawrence Stenhouse wrote, research in curriculum and teaching, which involves the close study of schools and classrooms, is the basis of sound development and the growth of a research tradition in schools, and is its foundation. So research for schools, research what you teach, teach what you research. Researchers and teachers need to collaborate towards this end. And Stenhouse goes on to say that the communication is less effective than community in the development of knowledge. So developing a community of learners and researchers is essential to what we do. I would add that at times of uncertainty, it's even more important for the Centre of Education to work more closely for the mutual benefit of schools and university. In drawing this lecture to an end, I'd like to share with you some concrete opportunities and some potential next steps for those of you in the audience that would like to take this further. Whatever your background, if you're interested in anything I've said, you'll see my email address there. Please do contact me. We've got a number of opportunities through our department. You can see some of these here, Research in Action Conference. In fact, we have a partnership conference on Thursday this week. Regular partnership lunches as well, all really important. And you'll be able to see those opportunities on our websites through the university. You'll be able to Google Centre for Teacher Education. But I'd like to leave you with one tantalising prospect or challenge. Whilst universities must be compliant with the Department for Education Ofsted within the National Teacher Standards, how can we go beyond compliance to foster the characteristics of a Warwick teacher? The Warwick teacher characteristics are a set of values and principles which we seek to embed in every element of our PTCE course and beyond. This is an area we've already introduced and been speaking to our schools about. These could, for instance, and this is by no means written in tablets of stone, comprise social justice, creativity, inclusion, and the international dimension, all, I think, really important areas. In fact, my colleague Georgina said, what about sustainability? I'm sure that's going to be a critical concept over the next 10 years or so. We propose that these elements are written into the course aims and learning outcomes of the courses. By doing this, we hardwire the important values and vision for the common good into the Warwick teacher education. So we've got to live our values in terms of this common good. I don't believe that I'm going to get a third chance to deliver an inaugural lecture. I don't think I can wait to the 23rd century. So the Warwick teacher characteristics will be an important way to develop the common good in education. Over the next few years, at least 20 to 30,000 children a year will work with Warwick teachers. At this time in the history of the United Kingdom, I think education will play a very important role in the future of this country. As Franklin D. Roosevelt said, democracy cannot succeed unless those who express their choice are prepared to choose wisely. The real safeguard of democracy, therefore, is education, and a good education. A good education is a common good for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Des. Now the opportunity is for us to ask Des any questions. So it's my role to find out if there's anybody who wants to ask any particular questions. So if you could just put your hands up if you have, that will be really helpful. Any questions? Yeah.
Thanks, Des.
I think there's a mic coming your way, Paul. Yeah.
Paul probably doesn't need a mic, by the way.
I just wondered, Des, with your interest in SEND and inclusion, do you welcome Mrs May's comments today that we need to do more about recognising mental health issues in schools through teacher education and through early infant teachers?
As the leader of Young Minds said on Radio 4 this morning, we welcome the opportunity. It's far too little, too late, I would say. I also would challenge the school system to think about what are the stressors and reasons for some of the mental health issues. And I think we should look really, really closely at the curriculum itself, accountability in schools, and the important influence it has on schools and the stress it creates for teachers as well as children themselves. So I think mental health is a really important thing in society. I applaud everything that everyone is doing there, but this should not be seen as a sticking plaster, not to address some of the important aspects of the school system. So I really emphasise the importance of a good education as opposed to just teaching and learning.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry to make you
I feel like I know the name of every person in this audience. So Phil.
Hi, Des. Yes, I'm Phil Molden from Schneider Electric, an employer not far from here, about a mile away. And brilliant lecture. Well done, Des. But I was going to ask a question. You talked very much about the importance of the relationship between university and schools, etc. But I want to ask, how important is the relationship between employers and universities in school? Because you know how passionate I am about children's education and that, but how can employers enrich that knowledge and bring it to...
I've got to say, I think you do a fantastic amount. So people won't know that my son Daniel, who's in the audience here, was with Phil last week for work experience. Daniel's in a university doing this course at the moment. But you took Daniel up to, was it Yorkshire or Yorkshire?
Yeah,
I think it was.
Wakefield,
sorry.
Went to a primary school in Wakefield.
And Dan came back and said he was so enthused at how much the children loved you being in the school and asking questions about engineering and Schneider UK and all the electrical work that you do. Again, I love the fact that Warwick University's widening participation strategy is not just for year 12 and 13 children, it might be potential graduates, but it now encompasses children in primary schools. So my colleagues over at Hollymounts Primary in Worcester are thinking, how can we work with the university to develop good early years practice and to evaluate that as well? Personally as well, I have worked in primary education and secondary, and I used to be head of year going all the way through secondary schools. And we used to get to year 10 to look at work experience. I think it'd be really interesting to develop work experience for primary age children.
And I think you're really right there, because we as a company concentrate more on the primary age children, because children are stereotyped very early in life. And so from an engineering background, you have to break down barriers socially, gender balance, etc. You have to do that very early. So that's why we concentrate on that. But perhaps there's more ways that we can work together to support teachers.
We're always open to new ideas, aren't we, Kate?
Definitely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Fantastic idea.
Any more questions?
I think Vinod?
Vinod?
Thank you, Des. That was a wonderful lecture, as always. Can I ask a question? One of the problems in health we have is that we have an artificial divide between primary care and hospitals, so you know, primary and secondary care as well. Similarly, in education, what can we do more about sort of integrating primary and secondary education? Because there seems to be an artificial divide, and if you're going to get real social justice, do we need to mix the two together? But also, do we need to have teachers that are more fluid in their outlook, i.e. sort of teaching in a private school and then moving to a different school for a few months? And I just don't see the mix. We're beginning to see it a little bit more in medicine over the last 10 years, but nowhere near as much as could actually help society at large.
Yeah, I think it's a really good observation. I've come across a few schools. I think there's one in Yorkshire, there's certainly one in Leicester as well, that teach children in one school, and they would call it a campus, that goes from 3 years of age through to 19. In fact, Lucy's boyfriend, Dan, who's sitting here, works for Arthur Terry Teaching School in Sutton Coldfield, where they have people who work across the trust. Actually, in some cases, you might have secondary people going to work in the primary school. So again, one of my specialisms was languages. Actually, bringing a language specialist into a primary school is a fantastic thing to do. As there are some head teachers in this room as well, would absolutely talk about the importance of managing transitions, smoothing out those differences between schools to look at a more all the way through approach. And you know, mental health is one of those areas that we ought to be looking at. I think in the conference later on this week, Inaugural coming along to talk about the role of something called a health passport, and how that might support schools as well. So watch this space for the future as well. Thank you.
Any further questions? Yes, thank you.
Just behind you.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed that lecture, Des. Thank you so much for that, and especially your comment about creativity in education. A big passion of mine as a graduate of the department. It's something that I've always taken with me. Essentially, the question I'm asking is, in your partnership work, how open have primary schools been to creativity? You've mentioned a key point about having programs brought in as opposed to really stretching and developing teachers and academic excellence in the classroom. How open have schools been, in your experience, to actually moving away from buying in programs and actually investing in staff?
I think there are many fantastic examples where schools are incredibly creative, whether early years, primary or secondary. But I would say it's mixed. I never criticise schools because of for me, the accountability and the focus on Ofsted inspections, the outcomes, is overriding for many schools. And when you've got that pressure through the accountability model such that, you know, after one or two difficult inspections, the school could be shut. As a head teacher, you might lose your job. I totally understand the pressure there are on schools. But I think that more and more schools are really interested in creativity. And it's not just the creative arts, but it's creative thinking. You know, actually one employment skill, thinking of Schneider UK and Phil over here, I know what employers are looking for is creative thinkers. It's not necessarily the remembrance of facts. You know, we in the opening to Hard Times, Thomas Gradwine says, what I want is facts, no more than facts. Sometimes I hear that in the Department for Education at the moment. And I think actually a creative form of thinking, the ability to think through problems, I'm pretty sure, because I've worked in industry and commerce myself, is what employers are looking for. So actually it is the right thing to do. It's not easy though, with the current accountability model that we have in schools. So I absolutely sympathise with schools in that area, but there are many schools that are really, really focused on creativity. It's a really good point.
Thanks, James. Okay, I think we've got time just for one more, so thank you.
Hello, thank you. I teach a module here at Warwick called Reinventing Education, and I've really valued the way that you've laid out some of your practical ways of engaging with improving education. One of the ways that our students are assessed in this module is to come up with an educational utopia. And I wanted to invite you to share your educational utopia. What might that be in whatever sector you like?
Oh my God, you are putting me on the spot. I suppose I ought to say the Centre for Teacher Education, with my boss, Kate Ireland. But I would emphasise so much of the last question talks about the importance of creativity. Actually, one of the books that I published a few years ago, which is this one, which is called Innovative Teaching and Learning in Primary Schools. The last one with Brittany, in fact, this one here, is about engaging, motivating and empowering learners. For me, those two dimensions, if I could say the utopian education system will be a mixture of empowerment and creative learners. Ultimately, I think both of those two things would help us have a better society.
Thank you, Des. Okay, many thanks to you all for that.
Thank you.
Okay. I'd like to take the opportunity now to say some closing words, really just to express my appreciation of Des's work within the department and within the wider university, and beyond that with the range of partnerships with whom he works. So it's my privilege, Des, to be given the opportunity to say some words of thanks and to show my appreciation for Des's work across all of those areas that I've just referred to, and in particular for Des's significant contribution to the development of the Centre for Teacher Education in the 5 years that we've worked together. One of the key themes that has come out of Des's lecture and is prevalent throughout his work, now and during his career, is his vision for and commitment to working in partnership through a collaborative approach. Des has worked tirelessly since joining Warwick to develop the department's partnerships with schools, and has done so with clear intent to implement and establish a model where the universities support the school through research, curriculum development, and co-development and co-construction of school professional development with universities. And all of that excellent examples that we've heard through Des's inaugural lecture really it really gives us some superb examples of the stretch and the breadth of that work that Des has contributed. So we've worked together for 5 years, and many of the colleagues here from the Centre for Teacher Education joined together 5 years ago. And Des's work has really taken, as I said, a significant leadership role and working together to be very influential in creating and establishing a teacher education model where, through working together with schools and the university, has had a significant contribution and transformation of education to the benefit of all involved. I'd like to give an example, and Des actually did refer to this in his lecture, and that's of a teacher education model that Des has established and embedded in Enfield, working with a multi-academy trust in a disadvantaged part of London. The model is founded on Des's values of respect and concern for others, alongside his commitment to social justice, as we've heard this evening. And the model creates opportunities for potential teachers within a community to gain the PGCE, and which enables them to actually stay in the community which they live, and many of them have children within these schools. And that model is very much around building that capacity, building a whole community of potential teachers. People who may not have thought that they were able to be a teacher actually have gone through the PGCE and then actually become very successful and effective teachers within that mat. And as we've talked about earlier, we also have the early years within Derby and in a similar model. And the work that Des has taken forward in that area, in that School Direct hub model, is a model that we will be disseminating more widely across the country in areas where teacher supply and retention is incredibly challenging. Des's commitment to lifelong learning and the importance of language acquisition from early years through schools, colleges and universities and on into adult life has been a key theme throughout his professional life. And Dave has already referred to this, but I am going to say it again. My fondest memory of Des is from our very first year working together, when many of you who are here this evening were involved in delivering a series of lectures to Shanghai visitors. Now, these Shanghai visitors had limited ability to articulate themselves through the English language. And we all got involved in delivering lecture sessions. But actually, some of us found it quite difficult to get across some of the educational theories that we were working with these visitors about. And I remember the very last session as I walked into the room to say goodbye to the visitors. And Des was leading a session on a particular piece of work where I witnessed, as I have done in many of his sessions, complete engagement and enthrallment of these Shanghai visitors. And not surprisingly, having heard the references of David earlier, I saw them, these visitors, on their hands and knees, crawling along while Des was going through this amazing, massive storybook version of The Bear Hunt by Michael Rosen. And actually, it was an incredible sight, because nobody noticed anybody else in the room. Everybody was totally focused on Des and his ability to bring the whole room alive through that one story, which most of us do absolutely love. But, you know, for me, that just it is a very fond memory and will stay with me for as long as we work together. So a real common theme there of that engagement of people through learning and through an inspirational approach. So that's just one small example of Des's ability to create interest, to engage learners of all backgrounds, disciplines and ages, to work collaboratively and to have a significant impact on an individual's ability to enjoy learning. The work Des is taking forward for the Centre for Teacher Education on working collaboratively with our partner schools on quality school-based research, which focuses on school development and improvement priorities, will over time have a significant impact on many thousands of children and young people in our community and partnership schools. Many of us will know Des for an important saying he often refers to, and it's something that I'll always think of Des whenever I hear, is research what you teach and teach what you research. And that whole philosophy and that approach Des has taken through our centre, and many of us are well, we're all completely committed to that approach. In addition, as Des has just referred to in the final part of his lecture, the work on developing the Warwick teacher characteristics, going beyond compliance within teacher education, will be Des's legacy to ensure that the Centre for Teacher Education, the wider university and schools develop the common good into Warwick teacher education. We are all incredibly excited and privileged to be taking forward that work through Des's leadership. So Des, I'd like to personally thank you and on behalf of the audience for everything that you do for our centre, for Warwick, and for your significant contribution to our collaborative work with school partners. So your vision, enthusiasm, creativity and passion for your work is infectious and inspiring. It is a privilege to work with you. So thank you so much for your lecture today, which we've all thoroughly enjoyed. Congratulations on your professorial recognition and well done.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Really nice. Thank you. Thank you. Actually, my wife did say to me, Shirley, sitting in the front row here, she said, if all else fails, just do We're Going on a Bear Hunt with the audience. But just to finish up, I did say we would finish before we have the sort of Prosecco and canapes and all this sort of stuff. We would finish with Chris just going through a final piece. And I promised that Chris would play this, and it's a piece by someone called Abel Carlevaro, you can see here. He died a few years ago. He produced something called the American Preludes, and this is the version that Chris is going to play, which you can see part of on the slide here, was produced some years ago. Carlevaro was a Uruguayan guitarist, composer and a teacher. When he taught, he would often pick up his students' guitars, retune it, and play the music back to the students. He was always positive in his feedback and his work with his students. And his set of preludes provides a real workout for any guitarist. Chris and I have been working on this actually from May through to June and July, and here's Chris to play us out on this one piece. Thank you.